I hereby call this meeting of the Norwood City Council to order. Please rise for the invocation and pledge of allegiance. This evening, we don't have anyone to do the invocation, so we'll have 60 seconds of silence.
Got started.
Thank you. Now for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Gears, please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen.
Here.
Mrs. Hoover.
Here.
Ms. Royce.
Here.
Mr. Kelsch.
Here.
Mrs. Winterbauer.
Here.
Mr. Thompson. Here. Mr. Braden.
Here. All members are present. Moving on to amendment of the agenda. This evening I have a few items. Please bear with me. Under reports of standing committees of council, we are going to add the Committee of the Whole report, a Streets and Infrastructure report, and Finance Committee report. Item M, the Fire Department report. We're going to remove that from the agenda this evening. Also, under Communications, item 2, we're going to remove that communication as well. And then we're going to add a letter regarding public hearing under Communications. I think that's it, Mr. Gears. Ms. Franzen.
I move that we amend the agenda as stated.
Motion by Mrs. Franzen. Mrs. Hoover.
I'll second.
Second by Mrs. Hoover. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen.
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover.
Yes.
Ms. Royce.
Yes.
Mr. Kelsch.
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, sir. All members present, voting aye, motion passes. Moving on to item F, minutes of previous meeting. We have July 12th, 2022 regular meeting and July 19th, 2022 regular meeting. Special meeting.
So we move that we receive and file the minutes.
Motion by Mr. Thompson to receive and file the minutes. Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll second that.
Second by Mr. Braden. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen.
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover.
Yes.
Ms. Royce.
Yes.
Mr. Kelsch.
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, sir.
All members present, voting aye. Motion passes. Moving on to item H, request to address council. We have one request this evening. Bishop James.
Good evening. Sonny James at 1830 Hopkins Avenue, Norwood, Ohio. First, greetings to each and every one of you. I wanted to come tonight and share a recent situation that happened with the 911 being called. Prior to that, though, I just want to, I'm a little set back because at the beginning of the meeting, I applaud all of you that you have prayer before these meetings. And I'm a little set back because Not that I have to do it, but when you do have a local bishop in your presence to say, well, we don't have anyone here to do the prayer, it's a little frustrating, especially when you have 4 other individuals with you coming to city council, one of which being the bishop's son, to then go back home and say, So I'm a little set back by that, but such is life, right? But I want to just say to the residents, I really understand how frustrating certain individuals have been with the new 911 situation. So several days ago, I got a call from a couple of my church members. One is a very elderly woman, and she called me because she said, Bishop, I contacted the police and we're not getting any response. So I quickly zoomed from the Tri-County area where I was to come to their home to find out that people had come and bushed out the window of a vehicle of her caretaker and tried to set the vehicle on fire. So after about 45 minutes, I contacted myself, 911, where I was then transferred to another individual. After another half an hour or so, I contacted a supervisor who then informed me that he is basically a civilian and does not work even with or for the police department, which I got his name. But the interesting part was there was another woman, Sergeant Joy, who I applauded because she did a fantastic job. She connected me through and she said, well, hold on, before we go any further, you contacted us saying we have Bishop James on the line complaining. And that wasn't the case. I just simply called to say, has a car actually been dispatched or not? Come to find out, though, they couldn't even tell us if a car had been dispatched. Let me just speed the story up a little bit. They called at 11:08 at night. I did not leave that home when the officer pulled off until 3:39 a.m. in the morning. And we were told everything has to be done by priority, which is kind of silly because you have an elderly woman in a home and someone burst out the window to a vehicle and literally tried to set the vehicle on fire. And we were told that had they called and said someone is on the porch basically trying to set the house on fire, you would get a faster response. I was later then even more frustrated because after waiting that whole time when the officer did come there, who was a very nice gentleman, by the way, he said, I'm sorry, when I finally got the dispatch, I was pulled away because I had to run and assist Norwood, which I love that because we want our residents safe, right? But I just wanted to come tonight to express to the residents that I certainly understand how the new 911 situation really affects a lot of our residents. And so I do plan to meet with Cincinnati and to just discuss like protocol, because that night was really, 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 and she's an elderly woman and she was terrified to death. So I trust and pray that we'll get everything together. But God bless you all. Continue to press toward the mark, making Norwood better, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Bishop James. That concludes our request to address council. We'll move on to item I, reports of standing committees of council. Item I1, Law, Ordinance, and Human Resources.
Thank you. To the Honorable Counsel of the City of Norwood, Ohio, we are Committee of Law, Ordinance, and Human Resources, to whom was referred Chronic Nuisance Ordinance, beg leave to submit the following report. Discussion of the Chronic Nuisance Ordinance to make it more effective and enforceable. Mr. Kelch will meet with Chief Kramer for input. Respectfully submitted by Susan Hoover, Chris Kelch, and Alexis Royce.
Thank you, Mrs. Hoover. Mr. Thompson.
Move we receive and file the report.
Motion by Mr. Thompson to receive and file the report. May I have a second? Mr. Kelch?
Second.
Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen.
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover.
Yes.
Ms. Royce.
Yes.
Mr. Kelch.
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, sir.
All members present, voting aye, motion passes. Moving on to I-2, Charter Exploration.
The Honorable Council, City of Norwood, Ohio, we, your Charter Exploration Committee, to whom was referred City Charter presentation by Xavier University students and general discussion on city charters. Beg leave to submit the following report. Spencer Atkinson, Gavin Toops, and Max Weiber from Xavier presented their project on city charters to the committee. This project was part of their project management class at Xavier. The group then had an open discussion on the merits of creating a city charter. The committee decided to reach out to other chartered municipalities to ask them to speak with us about their experiences. Also have minutes with this and respectfully submitted by Mr. Eric Thompson, Chairperson, Ms. Susan Hoover, Ms. Emily Franzen.
Mrs. Franzen.
I move we receive and file the minutes.
Motion by Mrs. Franzen to receive and file. Mrs. Hoover.
I'll second.
Second by Mrs. Hoover. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen.
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover.
Yes.
Ms. Royce.
Yes.
Mr. Kelch.
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, sir.
All members present, voting aye, the motion passes. Moving on to item I-3, Housing, Health, and Public Safety.
Thank you. To the Honorable Council of the City of Norwood, Ohio, we, your Committee of Housing, Health, and Public Safety, to whom was referred auxiliary dwelling units, relationship with Xavier student neighbors, landlord-tenant rights training, for family unit support. Beg leave to submit the following report. Planning community meeting on ADUs for August. Ongoing planning for Xavier student neighbor connections. Planning landlord-tenant rights class for community. And for family unit support, exploring financial institution options. Respectfully submitted by Mrs. Susan Hoover, Chairperson, Mrs. Candace Winterbauer, Mr. John Braden, and Ms. Alexis Royce.
Mrs. Franzen.
I move that we receive and file the report.
Motion by Mrs. Franzen. Mr. Braden.
I'll second that.
Second by Mr. Braden. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen.
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover.
Yes.
Ms. Royce.
Yes.
Mr. Kelch.
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, sir.
All members present, voting aye, motion passes. Item I-4, Committee of the Whole. Committee of the Whole report dated 5/24/22 to the Honorable Council of the City of Norwood, Ohio. We, your Committee of the Whole, to whom was referred diversity and report on accounting methods, beg leave to submit the following report. Council met to discuss diversity and report on accounting methods. Mrs. Hoover spoke regarding a proposal to create a task force or committee with other stakeholders to create diversity, equity, and inclusion advisory board. Funding sources would include grants until it is folded into the city budget. A culture audit would be to set goals and to create a resolution to create the DEI advisory board. Secondly, a letter to be submitted each month to department heads to request updates on the report on accounting comments. Respectfully submitted, Ken Miracle Chairperson, Mrs. Hoover, Mr. Braden, Mrs. Winterbauer, Ms. Royce, Ms. Franzen, Mr. Kelch, and Mr. Thompson. Mrs. Winterbauer.
Motion to receive and file?
Motion by Mrs. Winterbauer to receive and file. Mr. Thompson.
Second.
Second by Mr. Thompson. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, sir.
All members present, voting aye, the motion passes. Moving on to I-5, Streets and Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. President. To the Honorable Council of the City of Norwood, Ohio, we, your Streets and Infrastructure Committee, to whom was referred a review of the Montgomery Road Plan design costs and an update on road projects, beg leave to submit the following report. John Getty of JMA Consultants talked about the design process for the Montgomery Road improvements submitted for a SORTA grant recently. The committee felt we should move forward with funding the design, though the SORTA grant status will not be known until the end of this year. The committee also heard from Nowhere Powers about the status of current and future street and infrastructure improvements. Respectfully submitted by Ms. Emily Franzen, Chairperson, Ms. Alexis Rice, and Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Mrs. Franzen. Mrs. Hoover.
I move we receive and file.
Motion by Mrs. Hoover to receive and file. May I have a second? Ms. Royce.
I'll second.
Second by Ms. Royce. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, sir.
All members present, voting aye, motion passes. Moving on to I-6, Finance Committee. Mr. Thompson.
To the Honorable Council of the City of Norwood, Ohio, we, your Committee of Finance, Budget, and Audit, to who was referred then and now process, claims, City Council budget, iPads for Civic Clerk, Financial Recovery Plan updates. Beg leave to submit the following report. Committee had a good discussion with the Safety Service Director and Auditor about then and now process and the needs of departments to adhere to our purchase order process. Committee determined that all claims associated with the damaged expansion joint on the Ross Avenue Bridge be covered in full, and all other claims received so far this year are to be declined. We discussed the purchase of tablet computers for council. We need to determine if the funds exist to cover within our council budget. And the auditor updated the committee on the financial recovery plan. Respectfully submitted, Chairperson Mr. Thompson, Ms. Winterbauer, Ms. Franzen, and Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Brady.
Thank you, Mr. President. A motion to accept the committee report, file.
I'm sorry, there's also minutes with this too.
Minutes as well.
And the minutes, as well as the minutes.
Motion by Mr. Braden to receive and file the report and the minutes.
All right. That's all right.
Ms. Royce.
I'll second.
Second by Ms. Royce. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, sir.
All members present, voting aye, the motion passes. Moving on to item J, third reading of ordinances and resolutions. Item J1, ordinance amending section 505.071 of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Norwood, Ohio, entitled Cruelty to Companion Animals. Mrs. Hoover.
I move to have the third and final reading.
Motion by Mrs. Hoover to have the third and final reading. Mr. Thompson.
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Thompson. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, sir.
All members present, voting aye, the motion passes. Mr. Gears.
Ordinance amending section 505.071 of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Norwood, Ohio, entitled Cruelty to Companion Animals.
Thank you, Mr. Gears. Mr. Thompson.
Move we pass the ordinance?
Motion by Mr. Thompson to pass the ordinance. Ms. Franzen.
I second.
Second by Ms. Franzen. Any further discussion? Ms. Brady?
Thank you, Mr. President. I just to clarify, the changes here is the leash. The leash is how long they should be leashed up. I just want to clarify the changes made to this, that's all. Does anybody have that?
There should be the red line. There are a couple changes. We had may I speak? The parts that weren't enforceable were the temperatures and the times. So we pulled those out with the awareness that we can still enforce through the dog warden. So that was also put in there.
Respond? Just to clarify, temperature as far as how long the dog can be out on a leash on that certain temperature, like when this temperature reaches this degree, high and low, or is that what
Correct.
we're talking?
Correct,
Okay.
that was removed.
It was removed.
That was removed because when we talked with the vets, what I've got a boxer, what a boxer can tolerate in terms of cold is different than a tea kettle poodle.
Absolutely.
So the numbers the vet thought were just sort of arbitrary. So by pulling those out, actually made it more enforceable, because then the dog warden can say, this is simply not acceptable, rather than, well, it's this degree, so that's why it's unacceptable.
Okay,
That
okay,
makes
thank you,
sense?
appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hoover. Thank you, Mr. Braden. Any further discussion? Motion by Mr. Thompson, second by Ms. Franzen to pass the ordinance. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, sir.
All members present, voting aye. The ordinance passes. Moving on to introductory reading of ordinance and resolutions. Item L1, ordinance approving the editing and inclusion of certain ordinances as parts of the various component codes of the Codified Ordinances of Norwood, Ohio, and declaring an emergency. Mrs. Franzen.
I move that we suspend the rules and have all three readings tonight.
Motion by Mrs. Franzen to suspend the rules and have all three readings. Mrs. Winterbauer.
I second.
Second by Mrs. Winterbauer. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, sir.
All members present, voting aye, the motion passes.
Ordinance approving the editing and inclusion of certain ordinances as part of the various component codes of the Codified Ordinances of Norwood, Ohio, and declaring an emergency. Ordinance approving and editing the inclusion Ordinance approving the editing and inclusion of certain ordinances as parts of the various component codes of the Codified Ordinances of Norwood, Ohio, and declaring an emergency. Ordinance approving the editing and inclusion of certain ordinances as parts of the various component codes of the Codified Ordinances of Norwood, Ohio, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Gears. Mrs. Winterbauer.
Motion to pass the ordinance?
Motion by Mrs. Winterbauer to pass the ordinance. Mrs. Hoover.
I'll second.
Second by Mrs. Hoover. Any further discussion? Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Is there anybody here, I don't see a cover letter, who brung this to us, and is this part of the, of our checklist for the state? I'm just kind of curious. Does anybody have any details on this?
Mr. Morton.
I believe it came from my office, would be my guess. It may have come from the clerk of councils, but we got, every year, we get Walter Green goes through and updates our code with the ordinances that we've passed and then changes in state law. And so this enacts those changes to the big book in the green binder behind you and what'll go online. It's got nothing to do with the fiscal recovery plan.
Okay.
And those kinds of things.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Thank you, Mr. Braden. Any other discussion? Motion by Mrs. Winterbauer, second by Mrs. Hoover to pass the ordinance. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, sir.
All members present, voting aye. The ordinance passes. Moving on to item L2, ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a contract for the purchase of 750 tons, more or less, of salt at a bulk rate through the Hamilton County Purchasing Master Bid Service Rate and declaring an emergency. Mrs. Hoover.
I move we suspend the rules and have all three readings.
Motion by Mrs. Hoover to suspend the rules and have all three readings. Mr. Braden.
I'll second that.
Second by Mr. Braden. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, sir.
All members present, voting aye. The motion passes. Mr. Gears.
Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a contract for the purchase of 750 tons, more or less, of salt at a bulk rate through the Hamilton County Purchasing Master Bid Service Rate and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a contract for the purchase of 750 tons, more or less, of salt at a bulk rate through the Hamilton County Purchasing Master Bid Service Rate and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a contract for the purchase of 750 tons, more or less, of salt at a bulk rate through the Hamilton County Purchasing Master Bid Service Rate and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Beers. Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Motion to pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Braden to pass the ordinance. Mrs. Winterbauer.
I second.
Second by Mrs. Winterbauer. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen.
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover.
Yes.
Ms. Royce.
Yes.
Mr. Kelch.
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, sir.
All members present, voting aye. The ordinance passes. Moving on to item L3, ordinance accepting the recommendations of the Tax Incentive Review Council regarding city tax incentives for Quatman Corner Properties, Regent Realty, TST Cincinnati, TRI State Urological Services, and Ventura Commons, and declaring an emergency. Mrs. Winterbauer.
Motion to suspend the rules and have all three readings?
Motion by Mrs. Winterbauer to suspend the rules and have all three readings. May I have a second? Mr. Braden.
Second.
Second by Mr. Braden. Any discussion? Mrs. Winterbauer.
I just kind of wanted to review what we went over. Mike Skelly attended, Julie Camphouse from Norwood City Schools, and Catherine Fitzgerald and I attended the review council. Per Norwood, most of the CRA agreements are up to agreement pretty well. Two that we're keeping an eye on. One is the Norwood Manor. They basically are kind of still in construction period, so they haven't met their real property investment yet, but due to COVID and everything. So they just were given a reminder and continue the agreement. One that we definitely will keep an eye on next year at the review is the W&B Group LLC. They did send a reminder to the company that their new jobs goal is 80 positions, which they have not met. They're at 42 full-time, 2 part-time. And their real property investment goal is supposed to be $4 million, and they're at about $2.7 million right now. So just one thing that we will be looking at closer next year.
Thank you, Mrs. Winterbauer. Anyone else? Mrs. Franzen.
I had a question for Mrs. Winterbauer. Since I've was not a part of that group, who is on that board and where do they meet? Just out of curiosity.
We met at Alloy, so they put this on every year. Mike, you might be able to talk a little bit more on it. I don't remember the exact people who are on the board, but.
Yeah.
Could you please come so they can hear you at home? Thank you.
Evening, Councilors. So typically that committee is made up of representatives from the school board, the county, some members at large, and representatives from Alloy as well.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay.
I had wanted to ask before and I'd
Thank you.
forgotten to send an email, so thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Franzen. Thank you. Anyone else? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen.
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover.
Yes.
Ms. Royce.
Yes.
Mr. Kelch.
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, sir.
All members present, voting aye. The motion passes. Mr. Gears.
Ordinance accepting the recommendations of the Tax Incentive Review Council regarding city tax incentives for Quatman Corner Properties, Regent Realty, TST Cincinnati, Tri-State Urological Services, and Ventura Commons, and declaring an emergency. Ordinance accepting the recommendations of the Tax Incentive Review Council regarding city tax incentives for Quatman Corner Properties, Regent Realty, TST Cincinnati, Tri-State Urological Services, and Ventura Commons, and declaring an emergency. Ordinance accepting the recommendations of the Tax Incentive Review Council regarding city tax incentives for Quatman Corner Properties, Regent Realty, TST Cincinnati, Tri-State Urological Services, and Ventura Commons, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Gears. Mrs. Winterbauer.
Motion to pass the ordinance?
Motion by Mrs. Winterbauer to pass the ordinance. May I have a second? Ms. Royce?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, sir.
All members present, voting aye, the ordinance passes. Moving on to L4, ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a contract with JMA Consultants Incorporated to perform engineering services related to the Montgomery Road Pedestrian Safety Improvement Plan and authorizing the auditor and treasurer to make expenditures and declaring an emergency. Mrs. Franzen.
I move we suspend the rules and have all three readings tonight.
Motion by Mrs. Franzen to suspend the rules and have all three readings. Mrs. Hoover?
I'll second.
Second by Mrs. Hoover. Any discussion? Mr. Kelch?
Thank you, Mr. President. So I didn't see, usually there's something attached like the fund that this is coming out of. Can we get clarification from the residents just what fund this is? That the funds are coming out?
Mr. Moore? I'm sorry.
Section 2
Section 2?
of the ordinance.
Mine's one page.
Front page, section 2, from
Yeah, it just says the fund, but for the residents watching at home, what fund is that? What is that? What area is that under? What is it covered?
street fund.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Kelch. Any further discussion?
Put that in next time.
Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, sir.
All members present, voting aye, the motion passes.
Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a contract with JMA Consultants, Inc. to perform engineering services related to the Montgomery Road Pedestrian Safety Improvement Plan and authorizing the auditor and treasurer to make expenditures and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a contract with JMA Consultants, Inc. to perform engineering services related to the Montgomery Road Pedestrian Safety Improvement Plan and authorizing the auditor and treasurer to make expenditures and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a contract with JMA Consultants, Inc. to perform engineering services related to the Montgomery Road Pedestrian Safety Improvement Plan and authorizing the auditor and treasurer to make expenditures and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Pierce. Mrs. Franzen.
I move we pass the motion, or the ordinance.
Motion by Ms. Franzen to pass the ordinance. Mrs. Hoover, I see your hand.
I'll second.
Second by Mrs. Hoover. Any further discussion? Ms. Franzen.
I just wanted to talk a little bit about this for those that weren't at the infrastructure meeting. So we submitted a grant to SORTA, which is the Southern Ohio Regional Transit Authority, to kind of reshape the blocks approximately from around Frisch's down to Victory Park area to make it more accessible and safer for pedestrians. As part of that process, you have to get a design, get all the utilities squared away, et cetera. And in order to get those funds, we have to wait until SORTA decides who gets the funds, which won't happen till the end of the year. However, we have to have a design in place before we get the funds. So the Safety Service Director submitted this to our committee just to get our input on this, and we felt that even though, as in all things in life, there's no guarantee that we will get the money, we feel that getting this design in place will give us a good foundation should we get the money, and even if we don't, there are other chances for funding prior to when this project would happen, which would be prior to Montgomery Road's entire repaving here in a couple years. So just a little bit of background for everyone. Yes, Mr.
Thank you, Ms. Franzen. Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Do we have, is there any type of a figure at all, like, or what something like this would cost, or those just?
Yes.
Ms. Franzen.
So the design itself would be $392,000.
Wow.
But the grant would be for $2.3 million. So we did a 50-50 split where the city gives $2.3 million and SORTA gives us $2.3 million as well. And we use all of that big chunk of money $4.6 million to do all of the changes to the sidewalk, the utilities, bump outs, changing the lane structure, all of that stuff. So it's a pretty big project. Last year, we did get SORTA funds for a different project. SORTA, this grant program is relatively new, and so it's hard to say what our chances are because we only have 1 year of data, basically, from what they funded from last year. However, JMA feels that this is a good thing to have a design in place for, and feels fairly confident that we can get the money. They wouldn't have submitted it if they didn't think it was probable. So I just know it's a large chunk of money, and I felt it would be good to explain to folks that weren't there why this is being presented to council as a whole.
Thank you, Ms. Francis. Mr. Braden?
Thank you, Mr. President. Just quick, you said a whole lot there, and I appreciate that. 360, what was the figure?
368,000.
Okay,
Yes, I said
thank
the wrong number. But that would be, it's a substantial amount of money, but it's basically a little bit of a down payment on a giant project. And those designs, hypothetically, we don't get the money, the design is still good. Submit a grant next year, we get that money then, that design is ready to go. And it's important to have a design prior to getting the money because there is a timeline on using that money. If we don't have it in place prior to getting the money, there's a chance, because there are so many people involved, the state, the utility companies, the businesses on Montgomery Road, if we don't have it in place before the money is there, we may not be able to get it done in time. That's the issue. It's a timeline issue, basically.
Thank you, Mr. Franzen. Thank you, Mr. Braden. Mr. Kelch?
Thank you, Mr. President. If I could, through the chair, maybe ask the mayor and the administration, I know Noah's here, or Mr. Powers is here as well, their thoughts on this. Is this something that is very crucial to us? Since it is a large, substantial amount of money, we're not guaranteed to get the grant, and we'd have to sit on those plans, like I said, we'll still be good. Is this something that we're looking at, like this money needs to be spent on this in the eyes of the administration? Like, what are the thoughts behind it?
Mr. Mayor?
Thank you. It's a great question. Every 20 years, it's been 20 years since Montgomery Road was resurfaced. Every 20 years, it's really supposed to be earlier than that for state routes. But for Norwood, it's been 20 years. And every 20 years, we'll see a new coat of pavement go down there. And this is the right time to do this engineering plan. We had ODOT come in. They did a pedestrian safety study. We have pretty much everything lined up to really be successful this time to reshape this whole area. And so it's the right time to do this, and it's the right time to have these engineering plans put in place. Everything's lining up. And this the new sorta grants that are out there, this is a major amount of money that is coming in to do projects like this. So it's absolutely the best time to do it. This is the right way to do it. Engineering is telling us it's the right way. Leadership of ODOT is telling us this is the right way. There's all sorts of reasons why this is the right time to do it. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Anyone else? We have a motion by Mrs. Franson, second by Mrs. Hoover to pass the ordinance. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, sir.
All members present, voting aye, the ordinance passes. Moving on to L5. Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into an agreement with the Ohio Department of Transportation, ODOT, for the purpose of replacing street lighting on State Route 562, the Norwood lateral, and authorizing the auditor and treasurer to make appropriate payments in furtherance of this project. Mr. Brady.
Looks like there's no emergency clause, so I'm making a motion to have the first reading of this ordinance. Does anybody have an issue with that? Okay.
Mr. Thompson.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Mr. Braden, have the first reading, and we have a second by Mr. Thompson. Any discussion? Mrs. Hoover.
I'm wondering if we should ask Mr. Powers if he would like to.
Absolutely.
Mr. Powers?
Good evening. So the purpose of this ordinance today is to authorize us to make payments to ODOT when they do the 562 repaving project, which will be coming up in 2024. And so as they're going down and doing that and lanes are closed, that's the right time for us to go in, replace all those street lights that have been burned out, and they'll be upgraded with LED lighting. And so that's what this would go forward toward. And this is basically model legislation that's coming from them that we would need to pass in order to be able to do that. So there's no emergency clause because we're talking about way down the line, but as they work things through, they like to have the legislation well in advance.
You're okay with one reading?
That's not a problem at all.
Perfect.
Thank you, Mr. Powers.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, sir.
All members present, voting aye, the motion passes.
Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into an agreement with the Ohio Department of Transportation, ODOT, for the purpose of repairing, replacing street lighting on State Route 562, the Norwood Lateral, and authorizing the auditor and treasurer to make appropriate payments in furtherance of this project.
Thank you, Mr. Gears. Moving on to item L6, ordinance establishing the Norwood Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, DEI, Advisory Board. Mrs. Hoover.
I move that we suspend the rules and have all three readings.
Motion by Mrs. Hoover to suspend the rules and have all three readings. Mr. Kelch.
Second?
Second by Mr. Kelch. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Sure, why not?
All members present, voting aye, motion passes. Mr. Gears.
Ordinance establishing the Norwood Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, DEI, Advisory Board. Ordinance establishing the Norwood Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, DEI, Advisory Board. Ordinance establishing the Norwood Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, DEI, Advisory Board.
Thank you, Mr. Gears. Mrs. Hoover.
I move that we pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mrs. Hoover to pass the ordinance. May I have a second? Mr. Kelch.
Second?
Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, sir.
All members present, voting aye, the ordinance passes. Moving on to item N, unfinished business. Do we have any unfinished business this evening? I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Forgive me. I crossed off the fire department and I crossed off the whole thing. Item N, administrator's report. Mr. Mayor.
Oh, thank you. There's a lot, really, quite a bit going on. Varleman resurfacing, Varleman Arclo Court, all of that up there is moving forward. That street really needs it severely. Community center rooms were finished up. There's some, really just cleaning those rooms out and then getting them back in usable shape has been a big process. There's plaster work being completed at City Hall. They're working on a spec for the City Hall, or for City Council chambers upgrade, something that will make it so that the air conditioning can be ran during a meeting and we'll be able to still hear ourselves. It's interesting, there were a few panels and they sent me some pictures, and there's, above this is a ceiling that goes all the way up, probably almost 60 feet. It was like a ballroom ceiling way up there. And then there's a sub-ceiling that was put in below that, and then there's this ceiling. So above this ceiling, about 6 feet up, is another ceiling that was in there through the 50s. And then the original ceiling is all the way at the very top. So it'd be interesting to remove some of these panels and then go up a little higher. So we'll see what happens with that. But if you ever see a picture of the very top, it's incredible, the work that was done in here, the craftsmanship. We'll never get back to that wide open. We'd never heat or cool this place. There's work being done at with the Recreation Center. ADA compliance stuff is moving forward. Right now they're starting to work on the interior, the swim pool. Remember, we activated the swim pool, but it still had some different tile issues and some grout issues, so they're getting that ready. So if you look at it, we're always working sort of a season ahead. We're working on getting that swim pool going. key traffic control markings, getting them repainted here towards the end, preparing for the next season, which is leaf season. I don't know if any of you were over there and went into the safety lane, but that's where we store 2 of the leaf vacs, and those are, we'll be pulling those out and getting them fired up and ready to go already. You guys already passed legislation for salt. I hope we don't need any of it, but I'm pretty sure we're going to need some salt. So we appreciate you working forward with that stuff. The HR director has been working closely with the department heads to fill some key positions. The auditor's office had a position. The treasurer's office has had a few positions. Public Works has had there's a lot of different openings and things going on. People moving around within city offices. But we're getting those positions filled so that we can continue to operate efficiently and effectively. Some of the fun stuff that I got to do is the Pike Street Market recently. Of course, is always a great event. It is so good to see that area around the safety lane activated, and the kids and the adults and just the whole place doing well. I really think Victory Park has benefited greatly from the lawn area. It's a green space in the middle of the city, and it's a great place. The Norwood Day Parade, put on by the Norwood Chamber of Commerce, and we've got members. Joe Gears, our clerk, has been involved. How many years have you done that, Joe? Been involved in the parade?
Many.
30? I mean,
No, not
25?
Probably close to 25.
I mean, there are members, there are people that you see out in the parade that are keeping that thing going, that have been doing it for a lifetime. I hope to bring some of those to council to recognize those in the next couple of meetings. The Norwood Day at Coney went on, put on by the Norwood Business and Professional Women's Association. A great event, once again, raffles. You can win stuff. I win some stuff. I won some stuff. I also played a little bit of bingo, and guess what? I won a little bit of the bingo. One of the things that's nice, they gave me an envelope and said, you won. I took it out. I won $1, so I got to play 2 more games. It doesn't matter. I'm a winner. So it was a lot of fun. And it's always fun at that because you see your neighbors, you see old friends, and a lot of friendship and fellowship there at that. I did not see any tea kettle poodles, though, so it's a good thing. So those are a couple things. The last 2 things I'll talk about is one that there's so much progress going on at Factory 52. And the PLK group has done they are just working so quickly at getting that going. And Nick Lingenfelter has done a great job at just moving that project forward. And then the last part that I'll end with is progress at the Quality Insight. That auction went on. We've seen progress. We feel like the new ownership is going to be really a great benefit to the city. There's some different things that need to be taken care of, but the whispers are out there on who purchased it. It's not an out-of-state purchaser. Thank you. It's not an investor that's going to sit on something for a long time and just wait for it to grow. So we should have some really good news coming from that shortly. So that's about it. That's probably the most exciting part of it right now, if you ask me, is that we're going to see some activity, some movement in that. Within the next 6 months, we'll see something happening there, which is a big deal. So that's all.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Any questions or comments for Mayor Schneider?
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to item N, unfinished business. Do we have any unfinished business this evening to discuss? No? Then we'll move on to new business. Any new business this evening? Mrs. Hu?
I have a couple, just to keep things interesting. First of all, we are going to be having an auxiliary dwelling unit presentation. Unfortunately, I don't think I got it up to you guys. It will be on the city website. We'll be emailing it out. It will be on Wednesday, August the 24th, 7 p.m. at the community center. We're going to have some experts in the field talk about this. Is this a good, viable option for Norwood? There'll be time for questions and answers. So encourage everyone to come out to that.
What time did you say that was?
I'm sorry, 7 p.m.
7.
The next, really excited about the diversity, equity, and inclusion. Just a little bit about that. We already have our core group. I'm really excited. Mr. Couch is with me and Pam Mullins from the Health Department. and Keith Hamrick from HR. And we've already been having some meetings, and I love that we are all kind of coming at this with some different perspectives, all really respectful and eager to work. So the next piece will be getting 3 residents. So I'll be sending out letters of interest, and that will also be on websites and on the, well, will be emailed out as well. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Next, call to artists. There will be a Norwood International Art Show at Victory Park on September 17th from 9 to 3. They're looking, they already have lots of artists, but they're looking to have a really robust group. Really like wanting to get people that might not have their art shown otherwise. You don't need to sell your art, just come and show your art, but you can sell it if you'd like. There's a $25 application fee, which can be waived. For more information, Norwood Together is putting that on. And then my final item, thank you for mentioning the Off-Pike Market, Mayor. The next one will be before the next council meeting, which is Saturday, August the 20th. Myself, Ms. Winterbauer, and Ms. Royce were there as council members to talk to residents. We had the Montgomery Road plans there, so people got to see them in person. They are on display in City Hall, but this is nice to have them out in the community. So encourage you to come down. You can get your coffee, you get your delicious muffin. You know, Emily has her tea and honey. Not tea. Tea goes with honey.
Jam.
Jam and honey and your crochet items. But I will be there with some other council members as well next time if you want to chat about what's going on in City Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Stewart. Anyone else? Ms. Spencer?
I wanted to try to call a Parks Committee meeting. I had wanted to do it this week, but unfortunately some personal events got in the way. Do those on the Parks Committee have any time on Tuesday or Wednesday next week? Hopefully Wednesday probably would be better for me.
The 17th,
The 17th, yes.
I'm available.
6:30? Okay, 6:30 on Wednesday. I will send out an agenda by the end of the week, and we will get that going.
Thank you, Ms. Franzen. Mr. Thompson?
Yeah, I'd like to add an item to Housing, Health, and Public Safety Committee. Figure out the best way to describe this. The issue of plants from a neighboring yard causing damage to structures in another yard, not trees, more like ivy and vines and stuff that is decorative in one yard, but when it goes into the other yard, it causes property damage.
Invasive plants?
But it's not like an invasive species.
But it's
But it's invasive. So it's invasive to the yard, but to me it falls, it's like, you know, intentional or not, you can't really cause damage to your neighbor's property, so.
Right. All right, thank you. I'll put that in.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Kelch?
Thank you, Mr. President. On that, I would probably also include invasive species as well, because there are some of those happening where they root and get under like garages, fences, all that.
Right.
I have a ton of those in my backyard, and I would love to see discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Kelch. Anyone else? Any other new business? Mrs. Winterbauer?
Thank you. I have 2 things. To schedule the economic meeting that did not happen last week. So it'll be John, Susan, and Alexis. Do we want to do around the Parks Committee on Wednesday and just would, you want to do 5:30 or 7:30?
I can do either.
On the 17th?
Jim?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can do either.
5:30?
Sure.
5:30? Okay, thank you. Second, I attended the active shooter training today at View with the Norwood Police Department. Lieutenant Hicks and Sergeant Vickers ran it, and it was an experience, more or less. It's unfortunate that we have to be doing that, but it was a great experience, scary experience. It was amazing. They let me also participate. I got to do a run as well. But just to see the practice and the intensity that they want these officers to be trained. And they just kept saying, you're going in and you're gonna get shot. You know, they're not trying to clear rooms or anything, they're going straight to the shooter, they're going straight to the gunshot. So, just wanna say thank you to the police department. My kids go to Norwood. Sorry. Xavier Police was there. They were working with the medics as well. All the medics were there. We were doing runs. It was just comforting to see. Unfortunately, that has to be done, but I just want to commend them. They did an amazing job. They were working with each other. They were really problem solving. After everyone did a run, they would all go back and talk about what went well, what didn't go well, what they need to work on. And just that thought that goes into it, they did. It was amazing, and I was very appreciative to participate in it. I think they're doing another one on Thursday. I think at Sharpsburg, I'm not sure which location, but I just want to say it was great. Participate if you can, and just a big thank you to them.
Thank you, Mrs. Windbauer. Anyone else? No further new business, then we'll move on to item P, communications. P1, Mayor Schneider, July Mayor's Court fines.
Dear Mr. President and council members, enclosed, please find the report for Norwood Mayor's Court for the month of July 2022. Should you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me. Sincerely, Victor Schneider, Mayor, City of Norwood.
Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Motion to receive and file the letter.
Motion by Mr. Braden. Mr. Thompson.
Second that.
Second by Mr. Thompson. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen.
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover.
Yes.
Ms. Royce.
Yes.
Mr. Kelsch.
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, sir.
All members present, motion passes. Moving on to the next item, Hamilton County Environmental Services regarding the Lawnmower Recycling Program. Mr. Gears.
The Southwest Ohio Air Quality Agency is offering $100 Visa gift cards to Hamilton County residents when they replace their old gas-powered lawnmower with a new battery-powered lawnmower. The goal of the Mow Greener program is to help reduce emissions from residential lawn care equipment while encouraging people to recycle their old mowers. The program is very easy to follow. Residents simply sign up at southwestohioair.org, where they can upload their new mower receipt and make an appointment to pick up their gift card. I am writing to ask you to share this opportunity with Norwood residents through your website, resident newsletter, and/or social media. Attached is a photo you may use. Here are the key points to share with your residents. Mow greener with a battery-powered lawnmower and receive $100 Visa gift card from Southwest Ohio Air Quality. Follow 3 easy steps. 1, purchase a new battery-powered lawnmower. 2, recycle your old gas lawnmower. 3, go to southwestohioair.org to upload your battery-powered lawnmower receipt and make an appointment to pick up your $100 Visa gift card. What are the benefits? Battery-powered lawnmowers do not pollute the air. They are lower maintenance machines, no gasoline, oil, or spark plugs to replace. Battery-powered lawnmowers are lighter and easier to operate. For program details, visit southwestohioair.org. Thank you for sharing this opportunity with your residents. Let me know if you have any questions. Joy Landry, Communication Specialist, Hamilton County Environmental Services.
Thank you, Mr. Gears. Ms. Hoover?
I have a question, actually. Is this something that we'll be able, this I guess is a question for Mr. Powers, is this something that you are prepared to send out to residents, or do you need it formatted?
I would have to take a look at it. My understanding is that there's a very limited amount of these available.
Of the gift cards?
Yes. That this was a program that had started earlier and had some expanded offerings. So I'd have to take a look at that, see how many are still available. I believe there was only 25 available.
Oh.
So, but I would need to go back and look and make sure what that number is, and then that would be something we'd be able to put through our social media circles.
Wonderful, thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Braden?
Motion to receive and file. Is that what you need?
Anyone
Are we
else?
discussion? All right.
Yeah. Well,
No discussion.
did anyone else have any questions for Mr. Powers while he was standing there?
No,
I'll
sir,
take that
thank
as a
you.
no. Thank you, Mrs. Hoover. May I have a motion?
Anybody else?
I think,
Motion to receive and file, please.
thank you, Mr. Braden. Motion by Mr. Braden, Mr. Kelch.
Second.
Second by Mr. Kelch. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, sir.
All members present voting aye. The motion passes. Move on to the next letter. You have a copy of that?
Yep.
Okay. This is to council regarding a public hearing. Mr. Gears.
Dear President Miracle and council members, at the City Council meeting on July 12, 2022, a public hearing to review the recommendations of the Planning Commission was scheduled for Tuesday, August 23, 2022. That meeting time is no longer in line with Ohio Revised Code as the publication deadline was not met. Due to this issue, the new recommended date for the public hearing is Tuesday, September 13th, during the regularly scheduled City Council meeting. Carey Town from the Planning Commission has been made aware of the delay and is in agreement on the need to edit the schedule without issue. Please consider this schedule change. Sincerely, Lisa Granduski, Secretary to the Clerk of Council.
Thank you, Mr. Gears. Mr. Thompson.
Move we receive and file and accept the schedule change.
Motion by Mr. Thompson to receive and file and accept the schedule change. Ms. Royce.
I'll second.
Second by Ms. Royce. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, sir.
All members present voting aye. Motion passes. Moving on to adjournment. May I have a motion for adjournment? Mr. Thompson.
Move we adjourn.
Motion by Mr. Thompson to adjourn. May I have a second? Mrs. Winterbauer.
Second?
Second by Mrs. Winterbauer. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, sir.
All members present voting aye. We are adjourned.